Students, please settle down. We are about to start. Take your seats. And my humble suggestion that you may take some notes because like you would be learning a lot, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Meanwhile, we are just going to play a preamble of this conference so that you get to know what we are going to talk about. All right? In these environmentally informed times, studying landscape and spatiality has become increasingly significant in all disciplines of humanities and social sciences, especially when we see migrations, forced evictions, and a constant flux of human societies becoming naturalized phenomena. The term spatial turn refers to a change of direction towards the study of spatial imaginaries in narrative media and literary texts. Mediated through the theoretical and methodological development of research in language and literature, this spatial turn helps us study the assimilation of landscapes, cityscapes, natural geography, urban geography, mapping, and transnational flows. Seminal spatial theorist Edward Sawyer defined the spatial turn in humanities and social sciences as a response to a long-standing ontological and epistemological bias that privileged time over space in all the human sciences, including spatial disciplines like geography and architecture. This means that until the 20th century, academic disciplines of the humanities prioritized time, that is, historicity over space or place. But now it has become imperative to foreground the study of natural and urban spaces, of local landscapes, cityscapes, transnational flows, and other aspects of local spatiality embedded in the local rather than the global. A recent ongoing project of the British Council entitled Walking Cities may be cited as an example. Studying local spatiality in literature and filmic narratives is therefore perhaps an effective means for the non-Western world to free itself from the pervasive grand narratives and tell its own stories. In this respect, this turn is of essence for the growth of the discipline of humanities in Pakistan, because we need to not only tell our stories based in local communities and cities, but also be able to develop methodologies and theoretical frameworks to help appraise these psychogeographies.
Respected faculty members, worthy students, and distinguished guests, Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon. On behalf of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, National University of Modern Languages, Islamabad, I, Sayyid Abbas Kareem, and
I, Nurulan Rahman,
warmly welcome you all to the first session of the one-day International Conference on Spatial Turn in Literature and Linguistics. The two scheduled sessions of this conference, of which this session is the first one, will commence with the keynote speaker, followed by a panel discussion session. This session is entitled Matrolingualism and the Future of World Englishes.
Our first keynote speaker is Professor Dr. Almut Degener. Professor Dr. Almut Degener is a retired professor at the University of Mainz, Germany. Her research centers around Nuristani languages, Urdu and Hindi literature, the ancient Silk Road, as well as linguistic studies, in particular in the field of South Asian languages. Among her publications are grammars and text editions of Nuristani languages, as well as books and articles about Khotanese, Sanskrit, and Gilgiti Shina. In her spare time, Dr. Degener translates fiction from Urdu and Hindi into German. Her talk is on the topic spatial language and some reasons why we should study it. Dr. Degener, we all welcome you and request you to enlighten us with your keynote speech.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for organizing this fine conference. Thank you for having me here online, and I do hope there will be an opportunity in future to come personally to Pakistan. Let's hope for the best. I'm not sure if I'm going to enlighten you, and I'm not sure if anybody will profit very much from this 20 minutes talk, but I'll do my best anyway. So can I have the first slide, please? We had it before. Can you put this on again? The title slide. Check. So my topic is spatial language and some reasons why we should study it. And I can tell you from the beginning, this is not about metrolinguistics, and it's not about English, but about some things which may be interesting in this context nevertheless. Space and language and space. आवाज आ रही है ना? You hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear
Okay.
you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, this we have had it in linguistics for the past 40 years or so, and basically there are two views concerning the relationship between space and language. One may ultimately can we go back, please? With the yes, the one is the one traced back to the theory of the French philosopher Henri Lefebvre, and this is on the slide, that space is not the container where language is developed and used, but rather an ongoing social construction of human activities. This theory has had a stronger impact on other disciplines, but at least indirectly also on linguistics. Linguistic research based on this line of thought has focused on how spaces are produced or affected by language as used by speakers with different social, geographical, and cultural backgrounds, and how, on the other hand, forms and use of language react to existent spaces. Such studies look into spaces of language instruction and language use, language in migrant communities, language as instruments of power, of assertion in politics. And this is basically what we heard about in the video we've had as a preliminary introduction. The other view, that is different, the other view concerning the relationship between space and language is chiefly interested in how language is used to express notions of spatial relationships within a given environment, and how the perception of space is reflected in language. For spatial concepts are culture specific, and the strategies to put these concepts into language are also variegated. My paper is about the second kind of dealing with language and space. And now we can have the next slide, please. No, before that. Among the studies published during the past 20 years, many focus on the question of, to quote one of the seminal articles, how does the environment shape spatial language? Linguists working in this field commonly use so-called frames of reference. The term refers to a strategy borrowed originally from the Gestalt psychology of the 1920s. It works with the concepts of figure and ground in a way that an object, the so-called figure, can be located in relation to another, the so-called ground, within a virtual coordinate system for orientation. Stephen Levinson and others established 3 frames of reference, which should be applicable to languages worldwide and thus enable cross-linguistic comparison of languages from different parts of the world and of different genetic affiliation. These frames of reference are called, and can I have the next slide, please? They are called intrinsic, relative, and absolute. In the intrinsic frame of reference, this is in the middle, the coordinate system is anchored in the ground object, for example, in front of the bus. In the relative frame of reference, on the left-hand side, the coordinate system is anchored in the location of both the perceiver and the position of another object. Thus, the ball is to the left of the tree refers to 3 points of reference: the ball, the tree, and the perceiver. With an absolute frame of reference, the location of an object is defined in relation to arbitrary fixed bearings in the external world. And practically the only example which is usually quoted are the cardinal directions, north, south, etc. Another method of classification is the distinction between egocentric reference, taking the speaker as a reference point on the one hand, and allocentric reference on the other. And yeah, you have it. Egocentric, well, you can read this, I don't have to read it out. And then we have this other word on the right-hand side, geocentric. Geocentric reference is one instance of allocentric reference. It takes the Earth as a reference point. In the example, it's the slope. And now, next one, please. Yeah. This table here, shows how the different denominations partly overlap. So it's a question of terminology, as so very often in linguistics. Doesn't make it easier sometimes. Languages worldwide have a large yet limited linguistic inventory for spatial expression, such as case endings, lexical items such as verbs, nouns, adjectives, and adverbs indicating location or direction, and of course, nonverbal means, meaning so pointing somewhere, things like that. All of these can interact with each other with the morphology and the syntax. The difference is in how exactly are spatial concepts encoded semantically and structurally, and how does spatial language shape the particular character of a given language. While speakers of most languages do not use one single spatial strategy, but have a more or less wide range at their disposal, there are differences as to the degree and the way in which a particular strategy is used. To give you an example, in languages like English or German, to indicate a direction upwards or downwards, we mostly have to use adverbs or other lexical items like I go down the hill, I go upstairs. In other languages, it is much more common to use case endings, prepositions or postpositions, and various kinds of particles. Indo-Aryan Khowar, for example, which is spoken in Chitral, has 4 different locative endings to indicate verticality, distinguishing between location, horizontal direction, vertical upward, and vertical downward direction. Furthermore, use of an outwardly similar strategy does not necessarily mean that its function is exactly the same. For example, Dhivehi, that's also an Indo-Aryan language, has a dative and a locative case. English does not have these cases, but a dative in highly inflectional languages related to English, like German or Russian, would correspond to something like to, towards a person, and a locative would correspond to a construction containing a preposition like in, on, or under. However, in Divehi, the use of the dative in spatial expressions has taken on a specific function. It indicates that the location is not close to the referent point as it would be with a locative, but in a more vaguely indicated region farther off. Can I have the next one, please? Yeah, this is a comparison. Cross-linguistic comparison has shown that languages differ in what kind of frame of reference they favor. Some languages use geocentric references on a large scale, others hardly at all. Bill Palmer's original suggestion in 2015 was that the environment forms language to such an extent that the way a particular language would express spatial situations would be more or less predictable according to where this language is spoken. Oh no, not that. Go back, please. Yeah, we don't have a new slide for every sentence or so. In the 2017 article already mentioned, the authors admit that this assumption in its extreme form is not tenable. However, it is still true that the way individuals describe spatial relationships do reflect the environment, even though there are other factors that have to be taken into account, like social and cultural conditions. Palmer's data seem to indicate that speakers in urban settings have a strong preference for egocentric referential strategies, while speakers in more rural locations have a preference for geocentric strategies. When people migrate from their rural homes to urban areas where certain reference points, like, for example, the ocean side of an island or the river, are simply no more available, geocentric spatial language is often translated into either an absolute frame of reference based on the cardinal directions or a relative frame of reference. Now, as Rabi said, my personal field of research is the Nuristani languages, spoken in northern Afghanistan and related to the Indo-Aryan and the Iranian branch of Indo-European languages. Thank you. Therefore, I would now like to provide you a glimpse into spatial language in Nuristani. Spatial language there includes postpositions and pronouns, but the feature which is most characteristic is the use of a whole number of spatial morphemes which can take the form of verbal prefixes, adverbs, or adjectives. In other words, in Nuristani, geomorphic coding is dominant, referring to a system of spatial language based on the features of the surrounding landscape. So let's have the next one, please. The vertical direction. All Nuristani languages distinguish between up and down with special morphemes for more or less, and you can see it in the slide, a more or less precisely defined delimitation for the distinction of exactly vertical or at an angle. There is always a point of reference, this is the blue dot in the middle, but it is not necessarily the speaker. Not only is the direction of a location or movement indicated, but also whether it is directed towards the reference point or away from it. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Several languages distinguish between straight or downwards or upwards or passing an obstacle. So now we come to the geomorphic frame of reference, which is absolutely essential for the Nuristani languages. The villages in Nuristan are situated in valleys with a river as point of reference. Some are high up, some are in the valley next to the river. All Nuristani languages have morphemes for upstream and downstream directions. However, the morphemes referring to the river also appear in other contexts. Next one. Don't we have it? In the Nuristani language Nuristani Kalasha, Ber, which means downstream, is the outer part of a tree. War, which means upstream, is the inner part, the one which is closer to the trunk. Like var for a river is the part closer to the source. And the same distinction of ber and var applies to the house. In Nuristani Kalasha, var in a house is at the back of the room, seen from the entrance, and ber is the front part. The strong emphasis on geomorphic encoding is not exclusive to, is not exclusive. You're so quick, I'm not so quick. Aramse. The strong emphasis on geomorphic encoding is not exclusive to Nuristani languages. In fact, following Palmer, we would not expect it to be. Other languages in the mountains and valleys of the greater Hindu Kush and Karakoram area also have a richly developed geomorphic inventory. Two dimensions of verticality are dominant, just as in Nuristani, the riverine and the slope-oriented dimensions. Besides upstream and downstream, uphill and downhill, the Indo-Aryan language Palula, for example, distinguishes between directions away from or towards the speaker or a given object, and locations which are reached crossing a boundary or not. Kalasha and other Indo-Aryan languages, and this is not identical with Nuristani Kalasha, but it's spoken in Chitral, Kalasha has a special pronominal derivation for locations which are upstream or downstream, but in addition, it distinguishes between degrees of relative proximity. Now, what makes the study of spatial language so fascinating, at least for me, is the interrelationship between culture, environment, and language. Speaking of Nuristani and other Hindu Kush languages, we find that indeed cultural concepts are closely related to and reflected in language, and more particularly in spatial language. In the entire region of the greater Hindu Kush area, higher elevation is associated with ritual purity. In other words, what is higher up in the mountains is considered to be relatively more pure, and vice versa. The same binary opposition also concerns gender differences, where the male part is generally considered more pure than the female part. Even particular objects may be subject to the categorization of pure versus impure. And now you can have the next slide, please. Yeah, this is a quotation from an Austrian anthropologist, Max Klimburg, and he wrote about something from pre-Islamic Nuristan, but it is more or less valid now also. So let us look at how this concept translates into language. In a story from the village of Nishigram in southern Nuristan about the olden days from before the advent of Islam, we read, and the next slide, please. We read, Gröshduli was sitting on the Karipatsi near the Beramustim. Her husband was sitting in the Mulitain near the Varamustim and playing the harp. The house, as you see, is divided up into spaces of belonging and accessibility. Varam in the text literally means upstream. Beram literally means downstream. On the right-hand side, seen from the entrance, is the men's territory. On the left-hand side, that of the women. In between, in the middle of the room, is the open fireplace. People move freely within the house, but sitting for women is allowed only on the left side. Accordingly, Gröshduli is sitting on the women's side, near one of the two pillars supporting the front beam, and her husband is sitting diagonally opposite on the men's side, next to the pillar supporting the rear beam. So now the story goes on, because this scene is actually not as idyllic as it may seem. Gröshduli has a lover, and this man has been standing outside for some time, and when Gröshduli gets up and he hears the bells on her thighs, now next slide. This is what it looks like in this village where it is from. Perhaps the next one. Maybe I got it wrong. Acha, yeah. So this is the lover, yeah? He could no longer control himself. Suddenly he leaped down to the door. He leaps down because he had been standing on the roof. And the houses of the village, we've just seen the photograph from it's a very old photograph. It looks a bit different now. And now the next slide, please. They are put one above the other, see? And another click, please. This is what it looks like. So one ama is the house, or it is a one room house, basically, one above the other on the slope, and the couple, Greshuli and her husband, are sitting in the ama number 2, and the young man comes down from the roof, is now standing at the entrance. The scene is very dramatic. He leaps down, he kisses Greshuli and lifts her onto the roof. Then, of course, the husband comes out and the lover flees, etc., etc. It's very interesting, but we're not going to continue. But we go to another story. The other story is a fairy tale. It is from another part of Nuristan, central Nuristan, and we read this sentence in the next slide. The king will go to bed down valley. If we do not understand the Nuristani system of using river-related language for the house, and if we do not understand that the same morphemes also refer to a gender binary, we will not understand this sentence. But in the Nuristani context, next slide, please, what we see, this is a house in this Pashki is exactly central Nuristan. What we see as the bed on the right-hand side is the down valley or downriver bed, and that means automatically the bed on the women's side. So if the king goes to bed there, this is not his side, it is the women's side, and it means he wants sex. And in fact, the next sentence in the story goes like this. Next one, please. No, this is not. And then perhaps I don't have it here. But go back, please. The next sentence, which apparently I forgot to put into this presentation, is he will say to the girl, "Come down valley quickly." Yeah, I want to have sex with you, meaning, but it doesn't say explicitly like in English. It says, "Come down valley to this bed." Besides referring to the river and to the female part of the house, the term down valley has also another connotation. In folklore, rooted in pre-Islamic times, fairies and other supernatural beings play a considerable role. These fairies are located up valley in the mountains. Sometimes there are encounters and even marriages between fairies and human beings. In one tale from central Nuristan, there is a young woman with 7 brothers. In a mountain pasture up valley, the girl is met by a miraculous ram, becomes pregnant, and gives birth to a son. The family feels dishonored, apparently. The young woman runs away, taking her child along. She goes up valley again, meaning she's heading for the purer region of gods and fairies. And then another vertical dimension comes up. Next slide. She hurried away, and as you see, the father goes behind her, and the vertical direction is not only up valley, but now it goes straight down. Yeah, down. What does it mean down? Down apparently goes to an underworld. And the tale continues as we have it already on the slide. The daughter, this is very interesting. Yeah, she goes down, and there's a lake, and she comes out of the lake, and the father also follows and tells the same, and she throws herself into this lake, and the father also, and then below the lake they come down into a sunny plain. And if you know the Grimm tales, you may know Mother Hulda. The Mother Hulda, where we also have a well or a lake leading to a subterranean world. It is an underworld. In our context, it is more important to note that the words for up valley and for downward direction carry connotations which would not be understood in a word-by-word English translation because they are culturally determined. In Nuristan, the villages and the places around it the rocks and the forest, as well as the underworld and the realm of the fairies, all together reflect a cultural pattern which eventually constitutes Nuristani identity. It is this cultural identity which is reflected in language, and of course, not only in Nuristan, but in language communities worldwide. Right now, I do not have any concrete project or plans, but to work into this direction, investigating from a linguistic point of view, cultural identity as it is reflected in spatial language looks quite tempting to me. To sum up, next slide, to sum up, spatial language cannot be considered separately from the speaker's material and spiritual culture. When Europeans describe the way to a particular location within a big city, they will speak of left and right and quote names of streets. An American, I suppose, would probably refer more often to the cardinal directions. And a person with an Iranian background may refer to shops or other buildings in the vicinity. In Nuristan, a European would again use egocentric references, but he would be completely at a loss if asked to describe an exact location on a slope without neither street names nor clear landmarks like houses or trees. Then we have to use Nuristani language. So why should it be worthwhile for a linguist to study all this? Of course, to increase our knowledge about how language works, but also, and for me, this is the main reason, because research in spatial language, more than, say, research about syntax or phonology, helps us to understand cultures that are different from our own, or maybe even our own cultures. And more, it makes us aware that our way of perceiving our environment is not the only possible, let alone only correct one. This could help in becoming aware of alternatives to an Eurocentric and even to an anthropocentric worldview. I believe that this is more important than ever in our small world with so many conflicts around us, and not for linguists only. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Degener, for giving us an insight into the new domains of egocentric, allocentric, and geocentric aspects of languages, culture, environment, and language, and much more.
Respected audience, we will now proceed to our first panel discussion. We're joined by four esteemed academics today, each one of them distinguished in their field of study. First of all, I would like to invite our moderator of this session, Dr. Zawar Hussain Hashmi. Dr. Zawar Hussain Hashmi holds a PhD in linguistics. He is an assistant professor and currently working as head department of English undergraduate studies, Namal Islamabad. He got his doctorate in 2016 from this university. His specialization falls in the domain of social psychology of language. His research interests are multidisciplinary and he likes to work in areas such as cognitive poetics, cognitive narratology, cultural linguistics, discursive psychology, and the like.
I would like to welcome our first panelist, Professor Dr. Ayaz Afsar. Professor Dr. Ayaz Afsar holds a PhD in English literature and an MA in applied linguistics, both from the University of Manchester in the United Kingdom. He has also got a postdoctoral research experience from the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom. He has major interests in Quranic and biblical narrative discourse. He secured British Council and HEC grants for organizing international workshops on corpus-based research. He is widely published in numerous peer-reviewed research journals, as well as being a chief editor of the Journal of Contemporary Poetics, academic editor of the South Asian Journal of ESP, and a member of the editorial boards of both Insights and Kashmir Journal of Language Research. He has worked as chairperson, Department of English, and Dean, Faculty of Languages and Literature at IIUI. Having had previous affiliations with the University of Manchester and the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom, Professor Afsar is currently working as Vice President of Academics at International Islamic University, Islamabad, Pakistan.
I would welcome our second panelist, Dr. Amjad Salim. Dr. Amjad Salim teaches at the Department of English and Applied Linguistics at the University of Peshawar and has been serving as the head of the department for the last 2 years. He holds master's and PhD degrees from Cardiff University, UK. His research interests include second foreign language learning and teaching, social linguistics, formulaic language, and language acquisition.
I would like to welcome our third panelist, Dr. Anila Gill. Dr. Anila Gill holds a PhD in English linguistics. She has been working at NAMAL Islamabad as an assistant professor in the Department of English, Graduate Studies, Faculty of Arts and Humanities since 2015. Prior to this, she was teaching at FC College, University Lahore from 2008 to 2015. Her research interests include psycholinguistic aspects of bi- and multilingual memory, syntax, and syntactic theory. I would request our moderator, Dr. Zawar Hussain Hashmi, to commence the panel discussion session.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much for a very generous introduction of us all. A lot has already been said on spatial turn in linguistics and literature. So as we all know, that human thought has gone through many twists, turns, shifts, and switches. And these shifts, switches, and turns, especially because today we have the key term turns basically in our topic. So these terms are basically the signifiers, or in a way they signify centrality of certain intellectual trends in the epistemologies in fashion. And today's topic is also related to the same thing. This is a term that signifies centrality or centralization of space in intellectual approaches and intellectual trends, and the mainstream thought in cultural studies and humanities. The new term that is on related to the spatial term basically has provided a new angle on the way spaces are looked at, or spaces are understood. Erstwhile stable categories, space categories have become fluid now, and the natural geographies have been replaced with the social geographies. And in the same way, there is a lot more linked and attached with this. For example, the individual and independent has become now systemic, and it's become dependent, or rather interdependent. This is how the spaces have been confused, and a lot of marginalization, centralization, and all that. This is what is signified, this phenomena, the ones that we have currently in spatial turn. But still, this is not the final turn, because there are more terms in store, because as we already see that this the flux of human thought is moving on. Today we are lucky to have very learned scholars with us to deal with this topic. I hope the discussion will be very fruitful. I have the format of this today's panel discussion is that we'll have 2 rounds of questions. And in each round, I will ask one question from each of the panelists. And after 2 rounds of the questions from panelists and panel discussion, we'll move to the questions of audience. We'll take questions from the audience also. we'll take 3 questions at a time from the audience. So you'll have to wait for your turn for asking questions a little. So I would like to move to my questions for the panelists today. And we begin with our first panelist, Dr. Ayaz Afsar. My question to Dr. Ayaz Afsar is, our questions are basically very general and very introductory. So the basic question related to linguistics and how we link it with the spatial turn is that in spatial turn, the spaces, places, and language have been reconceptualized. So how do we link this reconceptualization of spaces and places with linguistics, and how does linguistics see or deal with this reconceptualization of spaces and places?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim and Assalamu alaikum. Before I begin, may I ask, you see, that which departments you are from? How many from Department of Linguistics? Majority. All right. Well, towards the question, as you would have heard my introduction, that my PhD is in English literature, but I have also interest in linguistics. So it would be much more focused towards literature and linguistics rather than what we heard in the lecture. And I was myself, I learned a lot about Nuristan and our local language. Well, as you have heard from the keynote speech, that linguistic turn means that any turn means that some significant transformation, significant move. And what is that linguistic turn? Well, that linguistic turn, not only in linguistics and literature, but linguistic methodologies and ideas used in other disciplines as well. Beginning with the 20th century, if we talk about structuralism and post-structuralism, which you would have studied in linguistics as well as in cultural studies and other social sciences. That was a major turn in linguistics as well as literary studies. And language was not only considered as a structure, but in post-structuralism, it was considered to go beyond the structure. Rather, the form is not as important. It is important, but not the only important element, but the context is much more important. So, if you link it with our topic, that is matrolingualism, very hard to have to say. So matrolingualism, and when I was thinking about this, I thought, what is matro mean city? And lingualism, linguistics, I mean, how does it make sense? Well, I come across, when I was thinking about this, I thought that in modern cities, what do we see that is common with linguistics? Well, in linguistics, some of the ideas developed in the later part of the 20th century, starting with the discourse analysis, we have the speech act theory. In the same way, we have other theoretical forms which we see in urban cities. What is that? So what is most important element in a speech theory? That is performance, where we say that saying is equal to doing. Or in discourse, what is important element of any discourse? That it has a contextual meaning. If we go in the traditional concept of linguistics that was considered to be just a form, you would have heard in literature formalism, but I think that form is equivalent to meaning. You can't differentiate between them. And if you have the students of literature studied Noam Chomsky, structuralism, and the concept was that a simple sentence in English consists of two parts, that is a noun phrase and a verb phrase. And if you don't have a noun phrase and verb phrase, a subject or predicate, it can't make a sense. But the discourse analysis says that it is not just the form, it is the context which provides some of the things. In the context of a landscape of any city, urban landscape, if we relate this speech theory and discourse analysis, how do we make sense of it? Well, if there is a board which says 24 hours CCTV operated, so that is not just a statement over there, it has a context in the background. And what is that? That you are being watched. That is a warning. Now it is not a complete sentence. In the same way, if you come across a slogan or maybe typing on the wall, no cycles. What's the meaning of this? It is meaningless if we look at just the form because it's not a sentence. But if it is on a billboard in front of a shop, so you may guess that maybe this is the cycles are for the hire, and at the moment they are all gone, it's not available. So that was the beginning of the term that using these ideas which developed in linguistics, but they are applied in a larger, broader social context. And the same pattern, you see, students of literature would have heard about Ronald Barthes, who gave the idea of post-structuralism. I mean, he's pointing out the one. The post-structuralism states that that there is no one meaning of any text. There is a pluralistic or multimodal interpretation of any text. The text has many meanings. There is a pluralism in it. And when you look at, you see any city or urban city and its landscape, and you see the plurality and the speech communities which differ from one community to another community, diversity and pluralism you find in any city. So these are some of the concepts which can be taken, you see, the rudimentary or the primary, the earlier forms of term of linguistic concepts used in other disciplines or in the context of a city. Then comes, you see, the next stage where linguistics is used as an interdisciplinary, that linguistic ideas are used in other disciplines as well. And the focus is not on the form or the linguistic elements or the linguistic categories, nouns, verb, phrase type of thing. Meaning is rather created some other ways. If we look at structural analysis of a myth, for example, or you would have heard about the grammar of a story or a narrative. And what's the grammar of story or narrative, means that as a sentence structure, it has a grammar, that it has elements. You have a noun and a verb, and you have the adjective and adverbs. So if you look at any narrative, it has got the same type of elements. What? You have a subject, that is a noun phrase, the doer. And you have the object, something done to, and you have the attributes, the characters, what qualities and values they have. Those would be the characterization of what type of a character is it. And you have the adverbs, that is the space or the setting, where do they live. So that was used as a metaphor. So metaphorical use of this grammar, but that is used in other areas. So when kinship analysis was done, that was also based on that structure, that is a linguistic structure that is moved on to other areas in the analysis of myths, in the analysis of fashion, analysis of politics, mass media, and much more.
Sir, thank you very much for your enlightening ideas and sharing your thoughts with us. We move to our next panelist, and if Dr. Amjad Salim, if he would like to add to all that has been said, the first question and all that's been said by Dr. Ayaz Afsar, he is most welcome if you like to add to the relationship between the way space has been reconceptualized and the shape that it takes in, the way it's been dealt in linguistics. You can add on to the discussion that's been made by Dr. Ayaz Afsar. But my question specifically for you is that in this reconceptualized concepts of the relationship between language, space, and place, what kind of situation has been created for language policies and politics in the context of post-colonial global world? Because this is the condition where we live, and the post-colonial world is linked strongly with this spatial turn also. So I'd like to throw light on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zawar, and thank you, the management, for holding this great conference, Dr. Inayat, Dr. Rabia, for having me here today. Thank you, Professor Ayaz, for setting the stage for the discussion. Okay, so if we look at linguistics as the field of study, all those who are students of linguistics and literature, they know that it started as some kind of armchair study of linguistics, or language. Sorry. So, for example, language was studied as a system, as an abstract system, where the focus was on studying the rules and how it works as a system, as an abstract system. And that kind of research went on for quite some time. And then linguistics took a turn. It has always been taking turns, but this time it took a turn. And the turn was from that kind of study of language to what we call social linguistics, right? And that basically what it did, that it brought the study of language from that, abstract system to the real language being used in society by real people, how they used it and the context in which they used was basically then became the focus of research and study for a long time. And I think since then, linguistics and the study of language has, occupied that central stage. So in social linguistics, quite a few things happened, and now we are at a stage where we talk about metrolingualism, So all those shifts that happened, we are now at this stage where we talk about metrolingualism and what it means to us. So, for example, as the name suggests, it is Okay, apparently the study of language in the city, or the relationship between language and the city, urban spaces, right? So it talks about language, for example, as a not as a system, but language as a social practice, right? Language as used, as constituted and reconstituted, produced and reproduced in real life situation in urban spaces and places by people coming from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different places, and different cultures, right? So metrolingualism in this way, it challenges and it goes beyond basically um, the traditional dichotomies between monolingualism and, for example, multilingualism, right? Because when we say monolingualism and when we say multilingualism, so it helps us understand how language is used, but it at the same time talks about language as a system, right? Where it is a concrete system, it's a system complete in itself. And when we use language, so we use one language, and then at times out of necessity or out of social situations, we then switch codes, right? So we do code mixing, we move from one language to another language, we switch from one language to another language. And that's how we become speakers, having multiple languages, in our toolkit, right? A linguistic toolkit. But when you say metrolingualism, so it goes beyond that. It says, okay, language, we use languages, right? And multiple languages, but then it is switching from one language to another language. Metrolingualism, it is not about switching codes. It is basically stitching codes. When you stitch up codes, right? Different languages, the repertoire that we talk about, or the resources that we talk about. So you have multiple resources and you use them because your conditions, your social conditions, your cultural conditions, they basically ask you to use language in such a manner that is a mix of everything. Okay, so language use, basically it determines your language practices. So when you say language practices, they come out of our language need, right, or our language use. So metrolingualism in this sense, it is a move beyond multilingualism. It is a move beyond monolingualism, because when we say multilingualism, so it is basically pluralization of monolingualism, one thing. Now, the second part of your question was basically how, for example, in this post-colonial world, language policies and politics have to do with it. It had to do a lot with it. I think, this world for the last 50 years or more than that, it has been, as we said, Anglo-centric, right? Not Eurocentric. Eurocentric probably in one sense, but it's Anglo-centric too. And all this, ELT teaching and ELT practices and the kind of, need that we face, or need is created, right? So this need that has been created for us to use language, English, and to speak English, and to learn English, and to teach English, and the kind of investment that has been done by English-speaking countries and societies, right? That has been done in a way to influence people, right, in post-colonial countries. So, for example, if you take the example of Pakistan, right, or other countries, post-colonial countries, when the colonizers left, okay, they left behind a very rich legacy of those who would continue with their traditions, right? So English, as we do today and as we are here, English basically we use out of need, out of necessity, and because that is how we try, that we connect with the world, right? And if we stop speaking English, we might be disconnected or we might be disenfranchised, right? That is how we look at the language, and that's how we have been forced to look at the language, right? So what I mean is that it is English, since that it is the language of globalization, it is the language of capitalism, right? And it is the language of power, and by power we can mean anything. If we want to move ahead and if we want to come with, counter language, and as Dr. Anis pointed out too, we have to come up with, a different kind of politics. We have developed politics of resistance, right? Politics of dissent. But for that, it is also important to create a society where dissent is tolerated, where difference is tolerated. If in a post-colonial world, difference and dissent is repressed or suppressed, or if it is not given space, then probably, in the post-colonial world, we will be looking at metrolingualism or these practices probably from an academic perspective or as academic pursuits. But then to really create that resistance and put up that resistance and come up with a different scenario and different politics, that I think would be a bit difficult to bring about and challenge the existing system. Thank you.
Right, sir. Thank you very much. There were some points in your discussion which bring me to the next question, that this globalization and the product of globalization, English as global language and international language, that's being owned by the rest of the world, and it's been broken up into varieties, and it's led to diversity, because we do not have English now, we have Englishes over the world. So how do you see this concept of Englishes, and how can we link this reconceptualized picture of space with the world Englishes? And what is the future of world Englishes related to it?
Thank you, Dr. Zawar, for this question. Looking at the restlessness amongst our students, I would like to simplify the question which has been put to me. This question involves 3 keywords, and they are world Englishes, space, and globalization. So please keep these 3 key terms in your mind. I'm addressing the students. World Englishes, space, and globalization. Okay, the idea of space lies at the very heart of world Englishes debate. It is easy for you to imagine that as English language spread to different geographical spaces, it led to the emergence of new varieties, new Englishes, or you can say various Englishes were developed as English spread to other geographical territories, right? I don't know how many of you are familiar with Kachru's model of world Englishes. Can I see some hands? Okay, that's great. So very few of you are familiar with Kachru's model of 3 concentric circles. That is a very influential model in the world Englishes scholarship. And this model, the way this model is organized, there are 3 concentric circles. In the center, there's inner circle, and then there's an outer circle, and then there's an expanding circle, right? There are 3 circles: inner circle, outer circle, and expanding circles. Inner circle includes the countries or the territories where English is spoken as native language. So these countries include England, USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, right? So these countries make the inner circle. And there's an outer circle, and outer circle is the circle which includes countries which were former British colonies, right? So English language was transplanted there. It was brought to those countries by the colonizers. So those countries make the outer circle. And outer circle countries include Pakistan, yes, of course, India, Singapore, Malaysia, right? And then there's an expanding circle, and that is the circle where English is introduced as a foreign language, right? And some of the countries in expanding circle include Japan, China, Korea, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and many others, right? Now, as I already said that, this very influential Kachruvian model is based in the idea of geographical spaces, right? So it is on the basis of geographical spaces that he had come up with this model, and or what forms English has taken in these different circles or in these different geographical spaces, right? So although many challenges have been, or this model has withstood many challenges, basically due to its oversimplification and also due to the overemphasis that it lays on the normativity or authority of the inner circle varieties. Even then, Kachru is credited with introducing the idea of, and also the term world Englishes to the realm of linguistics. And another thing, another idea which this model captures very well is the idea of origin, spread, and space. There's not one idea, basically three ideas: the origin of English, the spread of English, and then the space or spaces, how English spread to other spaces, right? Now, in the present technological era, you know, with all the technological advancement in the contemporary era, the notion of space has become highly complex, right? Now, there are kinds of spaces. We can say there are absolute spaces. Absolute spaces are physical spaces like cities, countries, towns, villages. They're also called spaces of places, right? And then there are metaphorical spaces. Metaphorical spaces are web spaces. You're very much familiar with them: Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, and even different forms of electronic media, right? They are metaphorical spaces, and they're also known as spaces of flows, right? Now, spaces of flows transcend borders. They are transnational, transcultural, and as well as translingual, right? So they transcend all sorts of borders, be them geographical borders or lingual borders, linguistic borders, or cultural borders, right? Okay. The next thing that we need to look at, yes, another point is multilingualism. You know, in different spaces, the two spaces that I've talked about, absolute spaces and the metaphorical spaces. In both of these spaces, you need to have a command or familiarity with more than one language, right? If it is an absolute space like a classroom environment, or you are in a restaurant, so you need to have, or you might be needing a command over more than one language. But that kind of multilingualism which you need in an absolute space is known as territorialized multilingualism, right? But the kind of multilingualism that you need at a web space or metaphorical space is deterritorialized multilingualism, right? That kind of multilingualism transcends borders. That is deterritorialized multilingualism. Now, deterritorialized multilingualism is very much linked to the idea of globalization, because globalization is a deterritorialized process. On the other hand, world Englishes, as it is envisaged by Kachru in his model, and then another big scholar in the field of world Englishes, Pennycook. So according to Pennycook, world Englishes, the theoretical debate on world Englishes is highly territorialized. On the other hand, globalization is a deterritorialized process. So looking at world Englishes from the perspective of globalization, requires a whole paradigmatic shift in the field, right? You need to look at world Englishes from an entirely different perspective. As I said again, that world Englishes is a territorialized kind of debate, whereas globalization is a deterritorialized process. And that is how, as I talked about deterritorialized multilingualism, that globalization globalization requires, or it kind of needs all the users of language to be deterritorialized multilinguals if you want to be fluent users of language, and if you want to be comfortable in the communication or in the different communicative needs when you're using Facebook, Twitter, or other web spaces, right?
Thank you very much. As we have short of time and the students are thinking of maybe of the closing of the session and all that, right? I would like to come to Dr. Ayaz Afsar with the next question related to what's been said by Dr. Sahiba. That the emergence of world Englishes has created a new situation. And what I see in this new situation is that if I link this with evolution of languages, and as we study that there is a divergent evolution and then convergent also, what kind of, I mean, if the evolution is kind of divergent evolution, it can lead to a situation where mutual intelligibility is compromised. And if there is convergent development and we can keep things controlled and we do not let things fall apart, the situation will be maintained. In this type of situation, in this type of situation, what is going to be the result of world Englishes? Are they going to be a strength for the global language, English as global language, or they're going to be a liability?
Sir, can I just have a word with the students? Students, your buses do not move out of the premises till 1:30. So stay put for a while, and you would be allowed to go on back on your buses. All right? So stay put for 5 to 7 minutes. All right?
None is going to leave. Stay back. Sir, please. Sir.
Okay, it's again about the word Englishes. Dr. Anila has already explained in detail with reference to Kachru, but instead of Kachru, I would refer to maybe Delheims or someone else, just to problematize this. Now, what is the concept of this word Englishes, and how much there is an acceptability, and whether there is any concept of standard English, that one English or one variety which should be followed by everyone. Well, because this is the topic of us, we are talking about the space and this urbanization and metrolingualism, where people are moving across the countries and they are immigrants and others, they are creating their own space. Of course, the English would be different. And the sociolinguistic concept of Creole, you would have heard that it is a language of contact. But still there is a concept of a standard English, though there would be different standards for different people. For that purpose, linguists categorize languages. One is that Kachru's model into 3 circles, and other is the 2 major categories according to the use or according to the user. According to the use, there is a variety in the language, that there is one user but speaking different languages, not different languages, but different styles of language. That is also variety of English. So if you are a lawyer, you speak a particular language when you are in the court or you prepare a case. But when you are at home, you speak a different language. And if you are a sport person, you interest in sport, and the same person who is playing tennis, he would use language of tennis. Or when he would be writing an article to a newspaper, that would be a different style or a variety of language would be using for academic, literary English for the newspaper. So it means that there is one speaker or the user, but using different varieties of English. That is acceptable. Yeah, everybody agrees. The second is related with, I'm not anything with you. The second is user related. And user related is that what the Kachru said, that whenever you use a noun or an adjective to describe English, there would be Afro-American English, there would be Pakistani English, Indian English, Singaporean English, Singalian English, Chinese English, Japanese English, there would be some. So what's the difference between them? Well, their linguists would be confused. You see, what is the black English? Is it the English spoken by Afro-American in America, USA? That would be black English. And what would be black English, you see, in the context of UK? Well, in the context of UK, there would be Afro-American as well as Indian and Pakistanis. They are also included in that one. So what the Delheims uses, the Indian English in the context of USA, is different from what Kachru is using Indian English. So what's the difference? That difference is based on the variation according to linguistics. There are language variation. And what is language variation? That there would be a different type of English which you find in pronunciation, in the use of grammar, sentences, order of the sentences, the use of the preposition, and other linguistic elements. So there would be two categories based on linguistics and then based on your identity. What do you think of yourself? But it has been noticed, you see, the research shows even in the context of UK, even the people, you see, who are the immigrants and they speak very good language, they associate themselves. They are kids, you see, when they are playing in playing football or any other game with other immigrants rather than the white British in the UK. So that shows your identity. You have the skills, but you feel you like the company of the people who are like you, immigrants. So what would they would be learning? They would be learning their language to make friendship, to show that we have a bond and association that is ethno type of, we are same type of people association. Well, the last point, because everybody is anxious and there are two speakers. Personally, I still believe that we need an international variety of English. And in the context of post-colonial, what you have said, sir, that is a danger. That if you allow a democracy and liberty, that whatever you use, you see, it is a Pakistani English, it doesn't matter for the teacher to correct your language because it is a Pakistani English, then there is no end of it. So for that purpose, two categories are used. One is institutionalized English and non-institutional institutionalized English. So what is institutionalized English? A variety of English which is fully described and documented, like British English and American English, and to some extent, that is Australian English. And another category is that is also used by the state, that is, state acknowledges it, propagates it, controls it, presents it, that it should be followed. So if we don't have those characteristics, we still don't have any non-native variety. Another kind that we have a native, as in the context of Kachru, that you have a native and non-native. I don't think that there is any non-native variety of English explained fully as British and American English. But it doesn't mean that American and British English, which are the native varieties, they don't have other varieties within their territories. So that is a problematic concept, that confusing, that what do people mean by different varieties of English, whether they are native or non-native, whether they are institutionalized or non-institutionalized. And until we have developed something like that, agreed upon that this is a Pakistani variety of English, and we have produced our own reference books like dictionaries and grammar books, and everybody and the government and the state sponsors it, acknowledges it, it can't be equalized on equal terms with those institutionalized varieties. And I hope that one day that would be developed. But still we need that you don't have an interaction within Pakistan, that's fine, you understand. But you have also come across to see other people, other nationalities, and within the region and international. So for that purpose, you need an international variety of English. And what would be that international variety of English? You must have some standard to compare with. So we still need that there should be some standard, and for that purpose, you need a standard variety of English. Thank you very much.
Sir, thank you very much. Because we have short of time, if you allow, we can move to the questions, both of the worthy panelists. We come to the questions of audience. If you have any question, we can have 3 questions, please, before you leave. So if anyone is interested, please, if you bring mic over there. If you please can bring mic here. The ones who can afford to sit back and stay back, and those who will leave by buses may move. So we would prefer that all of you sit here.
Students, if you have to leave, sir, we can have a 1-minute break and then the rest of the students can stay. But if you're leaving, please leave very quietly. You don't need your tongues while leaving.
My question is to Dr. Amjad Salim, as he discussed about the politics. As you know that Chinese is making its space in Pakistani linguistic landscape, and Chinese is, I will say, dominating the linguistic landscape. How do you see the language, future of language policy of Pakistan, and by comparing Chinese with English?
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting question. Researchers and scholars have been predicting about the future of English, right? In this emerging global scenario influenced by political, economic, and military forces and power factors. China is an emerging power, and it has been on the rise for the last 2 or 3 decades, or probably more than that. And researchers have been talking about it, that Chinese will, if not replace English, will compete with English, right, for this global hegemony. Now, in fact, and the theme here is not to, in fact, talk about how one language will replace another language. That has always been the case, and that has been tied to military, economic power, and military and economic and political hegemony. The question that I would ask is, how would then a person or people working in a metropolitan city communicate using English, French, Arabic, Urdu, and Chinese. Okay, how would they use these languages? Now, would they switch from one language to another language? Would it be Chinese instead of English, which seems like the case that probably in 50 years from now or 30 years from now, or whatever number of years from now, Chinese will, of course, if not replace it completely, it will compete with English as a global language, right? That is obvious. That will happen if not English, sorry, Chinese, some other language. But the question that I would in fact ask and raise is, what kind of language will citizens of the world or people living in a metropolitan city like, let's say, Karachi, for example, in our context, let's say Pindi, for example, in our context, let's say Lahore in our context, what kind of language will they use? Okay, if China, we need Chinese, we need English, and we need all other languages. The language that will replace Chinese and English, and for example, any other global language, will be a language that we call metro language. That is the language of the city, right? And people will be using codes and repertoires from different languages as a kind of language emerging from a situation, being used in a cafe, being used in a restaurant, being used in a workplace, any other workplace. So it will not be so much, to coming back to your question, it will not be so much Chinese or English. It will be the language used by a metropolitan citizen using a metro language that will replace that heterolingualism, right? So that heterolingualism, that dichotomic relationship between monolingualism and multilingualism, it will be polylingualism. That is, a person is, or he has a store of repertoires of languages which he or she will be using in a given context to portray a certain identity, okay, that metro identity. And a related concept is that of metro ethnicity and metrosexuality, right? So when sexuality is metro, ethnicity is metro, language is metro too. That means our traditional concepts of language and language use are, are under threat, if that is the correct way of saying it. And that means that another kind of language, okay, and it is not a language system, mind it, okay? So when you say, for example, metrolingualism, it's not a language system, it's a language in use that comes out of, for example, context, and that also portrays a certain kind of identity that has that not one-to-one relationship with ethnicity, with race, with for example, culture, and so on and so forth. So that's how I look at it. Thank you. It's okay, very interesting and very complex question. Do we have a language policy in the first place? So if we do not have a present, we do not have a past, how can we have a future? We need to develop one. We need to, and that's our job. Probably academia is there. So if we did not have a language policy, we did not have one. If we do not have a language policy, we do not have one. Expecting a language policy in future would be a bit too much, but I'm hopeful because recently I was invited to a talk. In fact, it was a discussion online, and there are now, the government, I think, has assigned this task to some, body to work on this language policy. So hopefully, we might see some good language policy, emerging out of what has probably been started. So I hope that something will come out of it. At this moment, I don't know. I can't comment on it.
Thank you very much. We'll take another question.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. I want to ask you a question. Sir, I have a question from the same panelist.
Who is speaking?
Yes, I'm speaking,
Okay.
sir. I have the question related to the prestige of language, that as you mentioned in your lecture, that English is a language of power. So being a student of linguistics, from the first semester till fifth semester, we have been learned that no language is superior or inferior, and there is no prestige we can relate with any language. So I'm confused from the first semester till now that why we associate power with any language. Starting from George Yule to Janet Holmes and Dindal Himes, why we associate power with any language. And my second question is that being a student of linguistics, as you talked that there is a special turn that comes with the passage of time in language or linguistics, same with the case with literature, from, for example, abstract system of language to sociolinguistics, and then from sociolinguistics to metalinguistics. So can we call the shift or the turn that occurred during before till 1960s or 1950s, the turn that was coming, for example, from the Greek rules of grammar to Delheims in 1960s, then till Noam Chomsky, the competence, the generative grammar, then the communicative competence, and all those things. Can we call them as well the turns in linguistics, or we can only call the turns that came from abstract system to sociolinguistics and sociolinguistics to the present one? So is it the case that
I hope your question is understood, so please.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. The first part of your question, right? So this difference between prestige and, yeah, okay. So this is what I understood from your question. When you say all languages are equal, there is no language superior to any other language, that is basically at the level of structure, that all languages are structurally, they are the same. There is no language structurally inferior or superior. So for example, any language, no matter how, irrespective of the number of speakers, whether it's 200 or 2 million, right? Whether a language is small or big, all languages are structurally the same. There is no language superior. So for example, Pashto is not superior to Urdu, or Urdu is not superior to Hindko, or Hindko is not superior to English, or for that matter, any language. So that is at the level of, structure, linguistically speaking. All languages are the same. No superior, no inferior. This concept does not exist, right? When it comes to analysis at the level of language, linguistically speaking. Prestige is not linguistic, right? Prestige is social, political, and ideological. When you say English is superior to Urdu or Pashto or Balochi or any other language, for example, it is the ideological, military, political power of the speakers of that language. Again, not the language itself. It is the speakers of that language, because they are militarily, powerful, and by that means superior probably, and socially, economically superior. So by virtue of that social, political power, their language also becomes powerful, and then, of course, prestigious. So when we use English, for example, and we say it's a prestigious language because it opens up the doors of, jobs for us. It is the language of capitalism, as I said earlier. Fine. So you find job, you basically get membership. It also gives you membership to a certain class, right? It's a passport to, so many things. So the prestige is social. It is not linguistic. Prestige is economic. It is political. It is ideological. Ideologies, of course, control all those things. And then the discourse, basically, that goes with it. So taking all these things into account, and if I have understood your question correctly, languages are prestigious, but not linguistically. The prestige comes from the society. The second part of your question, I think, as you said, that the different movements that have happened, or it was about how things have changed with linguistics, probably, is what you said? Okay, so I don't know if I can recall it correctly, but what I heard is that how things have changed, the change, in the focus of research from, Chomsky to, for example, Halliday to Delheims, and then, now how language is being studied. So that's how any field of study basically develops, this theorization about, and these different perspectives about a field provide us new perspective and new windows of understanding. So that is natural to any field of study. And that's how it has been there in linguistics too.
Okay, we're just going to have one last question, please, from the audience, if there is any. We can have one last question.
There's one there.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Sir, my question is about especially the accent.
I think if if this is fine with you, then you have already asked a question.
No, sir.
Okay, all right. Go ahead, please. Okay.
Sir, my question is especially about the accent of the English language, as we are a student of the English language. So most of the time, as the discussion was going on about the world Englishes, and especially it's a time of the world English, like globalization. So we are focusing on the, especially on the sampling the language. So when we speak English in different variety, for example in the Pakistani variety, so we mostly ignore the accent of the native speakers. That lead us to some kind of ambiguity in understanding while we talk to the native speakers. So how this can be resolved?
Well, when we talk about accent, that is different from pronunciation. Okay? Accent is your identity. It shows that where do you belong. And there can be some compromise on accent. You don't need to acquire. Once it was considered to be important, but later on, if you try to speak something like American or you sound like British, people would say, are you spy? Why are you doing this? You see, you have an identity. So the correct English or correct pronunciation, everybody accepts. And accent is not required. And what is the criterion? That it should be intelligibility. As long as you are intelligible to other people, and that is related with your pronunciation, then that's fine. And if you have, it is your identity, and you should be proud of your identity as far as it is correct. And who thinks, you see, that every native speaker speaks, you see, that is also related with the prestigiousness. There will be more than 250 dialects spoken in London of English. 250 dialects. And only one dialect is prestigious, and that was once considered to be in 1960s, that was received pronunciation. Okay, replaced by British Standard English. And it is one of the varieties that is institutionalized, because we have the dictionaries and grammar books, and detailed description of it is available. And anybody who's on a social hierarchy, wants to get a good job and a higher status, must learn that prestigious one to prove that you are able to do it. Old people speak, who live in England, if they have not been to even universities and prestigious institutions, they all speak English, slang English, colloquial English, many types of English. But they have to learn it, correct and standard English, if they have to go to school and pass the test. So don't be mistaken that anything on the name of it is a Pakistani English or the word English is, and they are acceptable. Okay, for what purpose they are acceptable? Even Creole is acceptable in a situation where you can use, you see, the language of gestures, or you mix and you communicate. That is its purpose. But if you have to achieve, you see, higher job, higher status, higher education, you have to learn, you see, the proper standard English. And there should be one that is institutionalized. It's not necessary that it should be 100% like that, but we are trying to get near to it. That this is the standard we are trying. How far we are, doesn't matter. But if somebody is telling you that whatever mistakes you make, and the teacher won't correct it, because they would say that, okay, maybe it's a new variety emerging. Why should we correct it? So your question, you see, that there was a danger. So there is a danger in it. We always need like a compass, that this is a standard. We are not closer to it, but we are intelligible to other people. And if every country and every variety is thinking like this, there would be mutual understanding and maybe a new variety that would be international variety of English, which is intelligible to every community in the world. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. And moreover, accent or accented language means basically deviation from standardized or standard language. So it's taken in negative terms also. Accented language is taken in negative term. And when you discuss about power and when you link it with the language, if you discuss it within the domain of language and linguistics, you are strictly linked with the language, but in order to study the sources or causes of power, you'll have to go beyond language, in fact, and we'll have to deal with human nature. So there is the source of power, basically. It's not only limited to language. We can take another two questions if there is any. There were two raising hands from this side. If you can take mic over there.
Hello everyone. My question is that on one hand, we are trying our best, especially colonized nations and societies, to decolonize our culture, especially our cultural norms and language, because language dominates each and everything in the society. But on the other hand, we see like in the history, we can see East Indian Company that what did it to us. But once again, the CPEC project is going to take place in this area. Do we have any policy that whether it would replace our language and other cultural norms or not? What do you think of that, sir? Do you have any policy, especially inside Pakistan?
We have a question for.
So it's like you mean that our cultural norms and culture is under threat. This is what you mean from language, right? Urdu language, right? Thank you. I think it's not Urdu. Let's take it a bit further. It's every language, right? So it's Urdu, Pashto, Punjabi, and every language, Sindhi. And I would say that probably what we call the regional languages, they are doubly marginalized, right? By Urdu and by English. So if you listen to someone who speaks Pashto as a mother tongue or Punjabi as a mother tongue, they would, you will hear the same thing from them regarding Urdu, that Urdu has probably, our language is under threat. And then we talk about Urdu being the national language of Pakistan, then we have this issue that, okay, this is under threat from, once it was under threat from English, and now it's under threat from probably Chinese. How do we look at it, right? How do we resolve this issue? How do we come out of this, right? So for that, we need to have a language policy. And one of the participants asked this question, and I said, we need to develop a rigorous language policy that is inclusive, right? Any exclusive language policy that is exclusively focused on one language, promoting one language, will be counterproductive. So we need to have a policy which is inclusive in the sense that it takes what we call regional languages on board, along with Urdu and, for example, Chinese and, for example, English. How do we do that? That's a very, very demanding task. But experts, language experts and policymakers, they need to sit together having some very fruitful marathon sessions to, get around the issue. There is no clear-cut way out. There is no solution because, clear-cut solution now at this stage. So if we want to move ahead, we need to develop a language policy, as I said, which is inclusive and which, of course, focuses on how to promote, preserve all those languages that are either endangered or on the verge of danger or under threat from Urdu or Urdu under threat from English or other languages, right? So there is no clear-cut way out. We need to resolve it by, some rigorous policy making and language policy. Yeah.
Can I add?
I would like to add here about this danger. Well, English is not a danger. That's why we have made it Pakistani English and we have adopted it, and we are not communicating it with other people, other foreigners. We communicate with each other as we are doing right now. So once it was considered, I am from International Islamic University, and once it was considered to be Lugatul Kufar, you see, our students used to say, why should we learn it? They used to learn Arabic, okay? And they said that they are not going to learn it. They were forced to learn English because we have got only two official languages in the university, that is English and Arabic. Well, English, once considered to be a language of enemy, now if you look at, you see, that is the language of the Muslims all over the world, you see, that has become, you see, once it was considered to be Urdu, you see, next to Arabic in the subcontinent. But most of the literature about Islam and the resources of Islam translated directly from Arabic into English, and English has become, you see, the first language of research for Islam and for the Muslims. And our diaspora and many converts, you see, they started with this one. Now in every country, they are the Muslim, they speak, you see, English like the native speakers. So how it is the, danger for our culture? It has adapted, you see, the vocabulary of Islamic terminology into English. So what do you think the people living in USA and the UK and other European countries, they are not Muslims, they are not practicing it. Their native language, the first language now is English, and they have all those resources available in English. So it has become the language of Muslims as well.
In fact, we're going to commit violence on English by forcing our culture into it. So, as we've discussed already, that I'm just on a lighter mode, just to make it lively. We can take just last question. This is okay. Please, Dr. Saib, please.
I just wanted to add something to what Dr. Ayaz Afsar and Dr. Amjad Salim have already said. Okay, amongst the world Englishes paradigm, we have certain varieties known as colonial Englishes, right? So colonial Englishes are those Englishes which are spoken in those parts of the world which were formerly colonized by the British or some other, right? So what is, what your concern was, that we are kind of looking down upon our own varieties and speaking English. So if we speak English in our own way, right, we are not speaking English the way British speak or the way Americans speak, but we speak English on our own terms. If we do that, then we are adding a local element to it, right? We are localizing English, and that is how we come up with a new variety, and that is what we call Pakistani English, right? So if you are using your own variety of English, I think you are being local, if not global, you are being local and emphasizing your own culture and kind of highlighting your own culture and politics as well. I mean, adding your own cultural, political element to English. That is what makes it a local English or Pakistani English or any other colonial English.
question,
Everyone.
please. This is going to be last. Be brief, please.
Sir Afsar, you mentioned about kind of, let's say, linguistic standard that we should, compare ourselves towards it, or let's say we can, kind of take cue from. But if we look at English, let's say British English or American English, it has been changing historically, the standard, or let's say the pronunciation or, the meaning semantically and pragmatically. So the first question is, why do we need a standard still, when we speak of, word English, why do we still need a standard? And the second question is there any possibility of, let's say, a linguistic self-determination for the post-colonial nations in the near future? Thank you.
Well, we need, everybody needs a standard. It doesn't matter we would have a British English as a standard or American English as a standard. If we have in Pakistan described in detail and produce our own dictionaries, reference books, and agreed that this would be the Pakistani English, then that would be taught to everybody. That would be standard. But there should be a standard. If you are playing, for example, any game, and you don't have any standard to reach, so what will you be doing? You see, everybody would be at a chaos doing whatever you like. Then how would teacher would mark you papers? What would be the appropriate usage? What would be appropriate grammar? What would be appropriate style that would be acceptable or not? For that purpose, we need standard. And standard doesn't mean that it should be one standard, as Americans have their own standard and British have their own standard. In the same way, if the Pakistanis agreed upon that this is the language of the educated people, it is the language of our court and our media, so it should be treated as standard, but that is not fully described yet. So there is a need that it should be described and people agreed upon, and then it becomes a standard. In that sense, I'm saying a standard. The other thing that, Pakistan is an independent country, like many other countries, like USA is an independent country. So what would be the decision of the people? But who makes a decision? And what process is followed? That is important. As I gave you the example of UK, they don't speak standard English, and if they have to get a job or go into higher education, they have to unlearn some of the things which they can speak at home, but they have to learn, you see, standard English to get through the exams from college or from school or a university. So they have to learn. So anybody, another danger is related with this one, that anybody who comes from UK and the mother tongue is English, considered to be a good teacher. Though he doesn't have that professional training and doesn't have those skills, but because of native, you consider him to be a good teacher. And many people, you see, in the Middle East and other places, they have been hired who don't have any training, but because they speak English and they have a higher salary. So that is not the case. Anybody can live anywhere, but until you have a set standards, you can't achieve anything. And there would be a chaos. The second part was language determinism. But linguistic determinism? What do you mean by
self-determination? What do you mean by that? How would you explain it?
Like you mentioned, like when somebody returns from UK in the EU or let's say in the Gulf countries, they're considered more, let's say, intelligible or intelligent than, let's say, someone who is Pakistani or Indian, because their pronunciation is better. So my question was, linguistic self-determination meant that, like, is it possible for us to, let's say, to think about our own selves, not compare ourselves to, let's say, some proposed standards, some abstract standards, like a pronunciation of anything. Like we continuously, compare ourselves to the British or to the Americans. can we like get rid of those notions of like whatever those are, standardization or whatever? That
Okay.
was linguistics determination.
Okay. I would say that what is a concept that it shouldn't be thick accent. Somebody said that thick accent is different. One is accent related a particular way, style of pronunciation. That is fine, but it shouldn't be so thick in a sense that people would say that looks foreign. But when you are in an international context, you feel it. But what you said, that is also related with standard. That if there would be certain standard and agreed upon, you see, even these are the names, for example. And if it is, you see, the appropriate stress and the words are syllabification, or it is intonation that you show your attitude. So if you are not familiar with that one, you look foreigners. But to whom? I mean, if the British visit, you see, America, any person, they would consider him to be a different person, not communal, I mean, the same. And if any American visits or comes to UK, they would feel the same. One thing is our identity. And identity shows, you see, some style of speaking. And that is intelligible to all others because it fulfills other standards which are achievable, like grammar, like pronunciation, like stress, emphatic stress, or syllabification, or intonation patterns. So they are the same. But as far as vowel quality is concerned, that would vary. And accent makes a difference because of those vowels, not because of most of the consonant names. So again, there should be some standard, and the standard means that it would be closer to international variety where American, British, Australian, New Zealand, Indian, Pakistani, they come closer and intelligible to each other.
Sir, thank you very much. I'm thankful to all the audience for asking very good questions and also the panelists for learned answers. We come to the conclusion of our discussion. Over to the hosts. Thank you very much.
Respected panelists, thank you so much for the brief but very insightful session. Now, I would like to request Dean, Faculty of Arts and Humanities, Dr. Muhammad Uzair, to kindly come up on the stage and honor our moderator and panelists with certificates and shields. First of all, I would request our moderator, Dr. Zawar Hussain Hashmi, to receive his certificate and shield.
Now the panelists are requested to come and receive their certificates. Professor Dr. Ayaz Afsar. Dr. Amjad Salim. Dr. Anila Gill. I would request Dr. Zawar Hussain Hashmi to please receive his shield.
the moderator and the panelists are requested to come up on the stage for group photo. Worthy audience, we thank you all. We thank you all for your cooperation and interest. It is now time for a prayer break and lunch, after which we will restart the conference at 3:30 p.m. Thank you so much.